Hello, my name is Madie Roach, and this is for Business Law 2150. And today I'm going to be discussing how fraud and embezzlement lead towards bankruptcy, preferably in Fortune 500 companies. And so my introduction is essentially just kind of describing what fraud and embezzlement are. I wanted to mention that these are two of the largest charges that a lot of companies receive, especially the Fortune 500 companies. When I decided to specify and focus on Fortune 500 companies, I really wanted to pick a few that I knew would be very interesting. So I've decided to discuss Enron and then the activities of Bernie Madoff and how he had a part in what he did. And so all these court cases, they will be showcased in the project. The reason why I chose these was that they are, of course, larger companies, but they deal with millions, if not billions of dollars. And so we will continue to go into detail about how each of these cases, are a part of bankruptcy and how fraud and embezzlement led to the actual bankruptcy progress. Before we do officially get started, I wanted to briefly talk about what fraud and embezzlement truly are, as they are not the same exact thing. They are very similar, so a lot of times they are associated together in a courtroom, at a lawyer's office, and so forth. But the true definition of fraud is that it's any act of deception carried out for the purpose of unfair, undeserved, and/or unlawful gain. Embezzlement is somewhat similar to this, however, it is the fraudulent conversion of property from a property owner. So I wanted to make these well known so that they'll be a lot easier to understand throughout the duration of the PowerPoint. A couple of current legal issues that Fraud Magazine was phenomenal to showcase, as this is a wonderful magazine to keep readers updated on fraudulent activity. One issue, this is actually not a current issue, but it kind of set the precedent for a few current issues, was that this former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy was accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes to help out his associates with contracts. Now, these contracts were worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and they involved defensive equipment. So this one activity that happened a few years ago has encouraged multiple other cases currently, and one being a purchasing manager at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. And this gentleman, he began collecting kickbacks totaling $838,000. Another issue was this one company, they had 20 civil service employees, and these were senior level employees, new guys, you name it, it was involved. And these companies' employees, they were rigging bids that totaled $318 million. And then a newer issue, which I thought was very interesting, was the up-and-coming computer-related fraud crimes. A lot of states have already placed laws, about 15 states have already placed laws to protect users from harmful effects of computer fraud. However, a lot of times computer users trust their computer and their so forth secured Wi-Fi's and whatnot to maintain their credit card information, their accounts information, just passwords and so forth, and this makes it very, very easy for people who are wanting to commit computer-related fraud type crimes to go in and steal an identity. So the primary legal issue I wanted to focus on throughout this presentation was how fraud and embezzlement scams, how they lead up to bankruptcy within Fortune 500 companies. So I had previously mentioned I wanted to discuss Enron, and I also kind of placed another couple on here, so just to compare. And so a lot of these fraud cases typically start with accounting fraud and then end up being much, much more with a lot more counts and so forth. However, they still fall underneath the fraud category, so we're still going to discuss them. Enron was one of the largest scams. This was back in 2001, and it was $11 billion, and it was corporate abuse and accounting fraud. We have a financial institution, which was $200 million, and it was embezzled and reported false income statements. And then Bernie Madoff and his clients, this was billions of dollars, and it was just overall spread frauds that killed investments of thousands of investors. Chart that I found that shows just overall the amount of fraud cases that were found in the fiscal years 2013, 2014, and 2015. You can see at the very top the overall investigations initiated. A lot of cases, can go on for years. However, they're only going to be counted in the year that they were started. And so if you continue to look down the chart, it shows how many people were sentenced from these crimes, what the overall rate was, and the average months to serve. This is not an issue that courts take very lightly. So a lot of times, people who perform identity theft and computer fraud and some of the smaller fraud cases, they will serve a much smaller time. However, if you're looking at the Fortune 500 companies and accounting frauds, those will be serving years versus just a few months. My analysis, I went and analyzed several governmental and non-governmental sources, and I was starting to see just how sly fraud and embezzlement crimes were. A lot of times, as an American, we do not really hear about any of these until it's a big issue, until it's a thing and they're busted and the CEOs are put behind bars. And so they come out of nowhere, and it's an overly successful business one day and then a court case the next day. So the FBI started looking into these cases and trying to figure out what were some of the most common fraud schemes, just to go ahead and prepare and make consumers more aware of these things. So a couple of the most common included telemarketing fraud, identity theft, advance fee schemes, healthcare, health insurance fraud, redemption, strawman, bond fraud, and prime bank note fraud. So unfortunately, millions of Americans will come in contact with some type of fraud, if it's their choice or not. I wanted to really analyze the Enron case. So right here is the past CEO and president, Jeffrey Skilling. So in the court case, Skilling versus United States, back in 2001, he was found guilty on 19 counts of manipulating financials to mislead the public about Enron. That was one thing about Enron, is that Americans saw this big booming company in New York. However, a lot of them did not know what they were about. None of their financial records were public, and no one had any access to this information besides the CEOs and the accountant. Another thing about them is that their stock prices were going through the roof very, very quickly. In a matter of months, they had almost tripled in price, and people just thought it was this most successful company until one day they show up in the court because of these 19 counts of manipulating financials. So no matter who is doing the crime, the courts give decent jail terms to those charged. And Jeffrey Skilling, this occurred in 2001. However, he was given 24 years in prison. I believe it's been decreased a little bit, but as of right now, he is still in prison. Another case I wanted to look at was the United States versus Bernard L. Madoff, also known as Bernie Madoff. He was charged on 11 counts, including securities fraud, investment advisor fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, false statements, perjury, false filings with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and theft from an employee benefit plan. Like I had previously mentioned, a lot of these Fortune 500 companies and other people such as Bernie Madoff, they received much larger sentences. So he is actually 150 years behind bars. That was his initial sentence. So even though I had just brought to you 2 more extreme cases, it's just goes to show that fraud and embezzlement are not taken lightly by the government and are very punishable by law. So in conclusion, fraud and embezzlement lead to some of the largest company bankruptcies in the United States. It could be something as simple as identity theft or computer-related fraud, or it could be something worth billions of dollars on a Fortune 500 company. And so several governmental sources have put in place multiple programs and just trying to raise awareness to these to help limit your chance of being taken advantage of and so forth. So in summation, fraud and embezzlement is a much larger problem than people believe it to be.